The sky over Sector 14 glowed an ominous red as the massive Threxian patrol ships hovered like dark specters, their searchlights scouring the scorched earth below. For the human workers slaving in the endless factories, it was just another night in their bleak existence. They toiled under the constant glare of artificial lights, smog choking the air, and the ever-present shadow of their Threxian overseers. Mika wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands slick with grease as she adjusted a malfunctioning hydraulic pump. The assembly line groaned back to life, its mechanical arms jerking into motion with a rhythmic clatter. Around her, dozens of other humans worked in silence, their faces blank with exhaustion. "Faster, human," barked a Threxian guard, its voice metallic and grating. It towered over her, encased in its biomechanical armor, a stark reminder of the gulf between conqueror and conquered. Mika gritted her teeth and bent back to her task. Resistance, she knew, would only earn her a shock from the guard's baton or worse. As the shift dragged on, a sudden tremor shook the ground. The factory groaned, its metal beams screeching in protest. Workers stumbled and machinery came to a screeching halt. "What now?" Mika muttered under her breath, her heart racing. Earthquakes weren't uncommon, but this felt different. An explosion rocked the night, the sound reverberating through the factory walls. The workers exchanged fearful glances. The Threxian guard stiffened, their insectoid limbs clicking nervously as they received orders through their neural implants. The air grew thick with tension. Above the factory, the sky erupted in a brilliant cascade of light as a massive alien vessel broke through the atmosphere. Its sleek, angular form was unlike the bulky designs of Threxian ships. Blue flames trailed behind it as it spiraled out of control, crashing into the barren wasteland beyond the industrial zone. The ground shuddered with the impact. Workers screamed as machinery toppled and sparks rained down. Mika crouched beneath a conveyor belt, shielding herself from the chaos. When the dust settled, the Threxian guards barked orders, shoving humans back into line. Mika's heart pounded as she peered out from her hiding spot. Through the factory's grimy windows, she could see a column of smoke rising in the distance. By dawn, the crash site was sealed off by Threxian patrols. Drones hovered overhead, their cameras scanning every inch of the wreckage. Whispers spread through the human quarters like wildfire. "It's not one of ours," someone murmured over a stolen moment at the water station. "It's something else entirely." "I heard it's alive," another voice added. "A beast injured and angry." Mika listened quietly, her mind racing. An alien beast? Injured? She glanced toward the horizon where the smoke still lingered. A part of her felt drawn to it, a flicker of curiosity piercing through the monotony of her existence. The Threxians wasted no time attempting to subdue the creature. Mika overheard snippets of conversation during her next shift, guards bragging about their exploits. "Shock traps couldn't hold it," one grunted. "Tore through them like paper." "We lost 2 squads," another said, his voice tinged with frustration. "The beast is a menace." Their failures only deepened Mika's curiosity. What kind of creature could resist the Threxians? Was it intelligent? Or was it just another victim of their relentless conquest? But the Threxians weren't giving up. The next day, Mika spotted a convoy heading toward the crash site, laden with weapons and containment units. They were determined to capture or kill the beast. That night, lying on her cot in the cramped workers' barracks, Mika stared at the ceiling. She could hear the faint hum of Threxian patrols outside, their searchlights sweeping the perimeter. The image of the smoking crash site burned in her mind. "Whatever's out there," she whispered to herself, "it's fighting back." For a moment, she let herself imagine a world where humans could do the same. A world where they weren't just cogs in a Threxian machine. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant roar, low and guttural, that seemed to shake the very air. The sound sent a chill down her spine. Mika turned toward the window, her heart racing. Whatever had made that sound wasn't just alive, it was powerful. And it was angry. Little did she know, That moment would set her on a path that would change the fate of Earth and the galaxy forever. The first rays of morning light barely pierced the thick smog that hung over Sector 14 as Mika dragged herself through another shift in the factory. The roar from the previous night echoed in her mind. Whispers about the alien beast had reached fever pitch among the workers, but any overt curiosity was quickly silenced by the Threxians' brutal discipline. As Mika adjusted a conveyor belt, she caught sight of a worker named Joss being dragged away by 2 Threxian guards. He'd asked too many questions about the crash site, rumors said. Mika clenched her fists and forced herself to focus on her task. Questions were dangerous, and in the eyes of the Threxians, all humans were expendable. Still, she couldn't shake her growing curiosity. The image of the creature, a massive, injured thing struggling to survive, haunted her. It felt personal, though she didn't fully understand why. Was it because she, too, had been left battered and broken by forces beyond her control? The betrayal Mika's defiance had once been a source of pride. As a skilled mechanic, she had secretly sabotaged Threxian machinery for the Resistance. For years, she operated in the shadows, her work slowing production or causing costly repairs. But trust had been her downfall. Her closest friend, Dane, had betrayed her to the Threxians in exchange for his family's safety. The day she was caught, Mika had been dragged before the Threxian commander, Zaltor. "You think your pitiful acts of rebellion matter?" Zaltor had sneered. "You humans are ants beneath our feet." The punishment was swift, a public beating and reassignment to the deepest levels of Sector 14's factories. She was forbidden contact with her former resistance network and relegated to a life of isolation among the other enslaved workers. Mika hadn't heard from Dane or the resistance since. But that defiance still burned in her. Every time she saw a Threxian guard, every time she heard the cries of a fellow human being beaten, she longed to fight back. The alien beast, whatever it was, felt like a spark in the darkness. Something the Threxians couldn't control. A risky decision that night, Mika stayed awake long after curfew, lying in her bunk and staring at the ceiling. She thought about the Threxian guards' conversations, the convoy of weapons, and the rumors of Razaretha's injuries. The creature was wounded, starving, and surrounded. It was only a matter of time before the Threxians succeeded in killing it, or worse, capturing it and turning it into another tool of domination. Something inside her shifted. She'd spent too long watching from the sidelines, her spirit crushed by betrayal. She couldn't stand by and let the Threxians win again. Slipping out of bed, Mika rummaged through her meager belongings. She found an old satchel, patched together from scraps, and began gathering supplies. The factory was full of discarded food rations, scraps of metal, and loose wiring. She worked quickly, assembling a crude bundle of items she thought might help: an improvised cutting tool, a flask of water, and a makeshift energy cell that might double as a power source. Her heart pounded as she slipped out of the barracks. The guards were fewer at night, but the patrol drone still hovered overhead. She stuck to the shadows, her small frame making it easier to blend into the dark alleys of the factory district. The outskirts. The air grew colder as Mika approached the edge of the industrial zone. The crash site loomed ahead, bathed in an eerie glow from the Threxian searchlights. Razaretha's ship was a crumpled mass of alien metal, its surface charred and smoking. Around it, scattered debris formed a jagged perimeter. Mika crouched behind a pile of rubble, observing the scene. Threxian drones buzzed overhead, scanning the wreckage. Occasionally, a guard would approach the perimeter, their weapons at the ready. The creature itself was nowhere to be seen, but deep gouges in the ground and shattered equipment told the story of its ferocity. "Fools," she muttered under her breath. The Threxians relied too heavily on their technology, assuming it made them invincible. They underestimated living beings, a mistake she hoped to exploit. The first encounter. She waited until the patrols thinned, then crept toward the wreckage. The heat from the ship made the air shimmer, and the ground beneath her boots felt unstable. She pressed on, clutching her satchel tightly. Then, she heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down her spine. Razarath emerged from the shadows, its enormous frame illuminated by the flickering flames of the crash site. The creature was unlike anything Mika had ever seen. Its black-scaled body glistened with a strange, bioluminescent glow, and its glowing eyes bore into her with an intensity that froze her in place. It was injured, as the rumors had said. One of its limbs hung limp, a deep gash leaking an iridescent blue fluid. Yet its posture was tense, coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Mika slowly raised her hands, her heart hammering in her chest. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered. "I want to help." The creature snarled, its massive teeth glinting in the dim light. Mika's instincts screamed at her to run, but she held her ground. Reaching into her satchel, she pulled out a ration pack and placed it on the ground in front of her. Then, she backed away, her hand still raised. Razarath's eyes flicked between her and the food. It let out a low rumble, then cautiously approached the offering. Mika held her breath as it sniffed the rations, then devoured them in a single bite. For a moment, the beast looked at her, its gaze unreadable. Then it stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Mika exhaled, her legs trembling. She didn't know what she'd just started, but one thing was clear: Razarath wasn't just a beast. It was something far more dangerous and far more important. The industrial wasteland surrounding the crash site became Mika's secret haven. Every night, she ventured out under the cover of darkness, her satchel packed with whatever scraps she could scavenge. Each time, she left an offering for the creature and backed away to a safe distance. Razarath would emerge from the shadows, its hulking form illuminated by the soft glow of its bioluminescent scales. At first, the encounters were silent and tense. Razarath devoured the food with wary glances at Mika, its glowing eyes following her every movement. But over time, the creature's hostility softened. It began to linger after eating, its sharp gaze curious rather than threatening. One night, Mika took a risk. Instead of retreating, she sat down on a nearby rock and pulled out the small toolkit she always carried. She opened it slowly, showing Razarath the crude instruments inside. "I want to help," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Your wound, it's not healing. I can fix it." The beast let out a low growl, but it didn't retreat. Its injured limb was still oozing that strange blue fluid, the gash surrounded by scorched, ragged tissue. Mika hesitated, unsure if it could understand her words. Instead, she extended her hand slowly, holding out a small energy cell she had modified into a makeshift cauterizer. Razarath's head tilted, its glowing eyes narrowing. It leaned closer, sniffing the device, then let out a low rumble that Mika chose to interpret as reluctant consent. Slowly, carefully, she approached the beast. Trust forged in pain up close, Razarath was even more imposing. Its scales shimmered like polished obsidian, each one ridged and sharp. The bioluminescent glow pulsing along its body seemed to shift in response to her movements. Mika's hands shook as she inspected the wound, but she forced herself to focus. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, as much to herself as to the creature. Razarath's growl deepened, a warning, but it didn't pull away. Mika activated the cauterizer, and the sharp hiss of seared flesh filled the air. Razarath roared, its massive claws digging into the ground. Mika stumbled back, her heart pounding, but the creature didn't strike. Instead, it glared at her, its gaze intense but controlled. "I'm sorry," Mika said, her voice trembling. "It's the only way." When the process was done, she applied a salve sheet concocted from industrial chemicals crude, but it would suffice. Razarath let out a low, almost resigned rumble and lowered itself to the ground. Its bioluminescent glow dimmed, as though signaling exhaustion. Mika sat beside it, her heart still racing. For the first time, she allowed herself to admire the creature's beauty. Despite its injuries, Razarath radiated an aura of immense power and intelligence. She realized she wasn't just helping a beast, she was aiding a sentient being. The language of survival. Over the next few nights, Mika noticed a change in Razaratha's behavior. The creature began to communicate not with words, but with gestures and sounds. It would tap the ground with its claws or emit low, melodic rumbles that Mika started to interpret as expressions of emotion. One night, it scraped the ground in a deliberate pattern, creating a series of intricate lines and symbols. Mika watched in awe as the lines began to resemble a crude map of the stars. Razarath pointed to one cluster, then to itself, letting out a mournful sound. "You're lost," Mika whispered, understanding dawning. "You're not from here." The beast's bioluminescence pulsed softly, as if in agreement. Mika spent hours studying the map Razarath created, piecing together fragments of its story. From its gestures, she deduced that it had been fleeing something, a fleet, perhaps, or another predator. Its ship had been destroyed in the process, leaving it stranded on Earth. "Betrayed," Mika said aloud, the word tasting bitter. Razaratha's eyes narrowed, its glow intensifying briefly. She knew that look. It was the look of someone or something that had lost everything. Danger on the horizon. The fragile trust between Mika and Razarath grew stronger with each encounter, but their time was running out. The Threxians had not abandoned their pursuit. From her position in the factory, Mika overheard the guards discussing new weapons being brought to Sector 14, plasma lances, sonic disruptors, and energy containment fields designed to neutralize the creature's bioluminescent defenses. "They're getting desperate," one guard said, his voice tense. "If we don't capture it soon, Zaltor will purge the entire sector." Mika's blood ran cold. Purges were Threxian policy for handling problems too costly to fix. They would annihilate every human in the region to ensure Razaratha's destruction. That night, she rushed to the crash site, her satchel heavier than usual. Razarath greeted her with a low rumble, but Mika's expression silenced the creature. She spread out a crude blueprint she had stolen from the factory plans for the containment weapons. "They're coming for you," she said, pointing to the designs. "And if they can't capture you, they'll destroy everything." Razarath growled, its bioluminescent patterns flaring angrily. Mika placed a hand on the ground, her voice firm. "We have to stop them. Together." The creature's eyes bored into hers, its expression unreadable. Then, slowly, Razarath lowered its head and let out a deep, resonant sound, a sound Mika chose to interpret as agreement. Preparing for the fight. Mika knew she couldn't fight the Threxians alone. She needed allies, and that meant convincing the other workers to join her. For years, fear had kept them compliant, but Razaratha's existence was a spark of hope, one she hoped to ignite into rebellion. As she prepared to leave the crash site, Razarath nudged her with its massive head. Mika turned back, surprised, and saw the creature pawing at a piece of debris. It pushed the object toward her, a shard of its ship, glowing faintly with the same bioluminescence that pulsed through its body. "You want me to take this?" Mika asked, picking up the shard. It was warm to the touch, its glow intensifying as she held it. Razarath let out a low rumble, its gaze unwavering. Mika nodded, understanding its message. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for something greater. With the shard in hand and determination burning in her chest, Mika turned back toward the factory. The enslaved human and the alien beast had forged a fragile alliance, and soon, the Threxians would learn the power of defiance. The factory floor hummed with oppressive monotony as Mika returned to her daily shift. Workers shuffled between stations, their faces blank with exhaustion, but Mika's mind was ablaze with plans. Clutched tightly in her satchel was the bioluminescent shard Razarath had entrusted to her, a piece of alien technology unlike anything the Threxians had. She knew it was the key to rallying the humans and mounting a defense. Mika glanced around, her gaze settling on familiar faces. These were people she had worked beside for years, their spirits crushed under the weight of Threxian domination. Yet beneath their fear, she saw flickers of resilience. If Razarath had survived, maybe they could, too. Gathering allies that night, under the cover of darkness, Mika approached her first recruit, an old engineer named Lyra who had once been part of the resistance. Lyra had scars on her face from a failed uprising, a constant reminder of what defiance could cost. "You're insane," Lyra said, after Mika laid out her plan. "You want to go against the Thryxians with what? Hope and scraps?" Mika placed a glowing shard on the table between them. It pulsed faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls of Lyra's cramped quarters. "This is from Razarath," Mika said. "It's alive, Lyra. It's intelligent, and it's on our side. We just have to give it a chance." Lyra's eyes lingered on the shard. "If you're lying, you'll get us all killed." "I'm not," Mika said firmly. "The Thryxians are bringing in containment weapons. They'll wipe out everyone in Sector 14 to get to Razarath. We have no choice but to fight." After a long pause, Lyra nodded. "I'll help you. But you'll need more than just me." Over the next few days, Mika quietly recruited others, mechanics, welders, and scavengers who were fed up with their existence. They met in abandoned corners of the factory, whispering plans while the Thryxian guards patrolled obliviously above. Mika's stolen blueprints became their guide, and Razarath's shard became their symbol. The shard was more than a piece of technology, it was a source of energy. When connected to old machinery, it revived dead circuits and powered makeshift weapons. It was clear that Razarath's technology was far more advanced than the Thryxians, and Mika intended to use it. The Thryxian offensive. The Thryxians launched their assault on Razarath 3 days later. Massive plasma cannons were wheeled into place, their energy cores glowing with malevolent light. Drones swarmed the crash site, relaying data back to the Thryxian command center. Mika and her group watched from a distance, hidden behind a ridge of scrap metal. Razarath had retreated into the shadows of its ship, its bioluminescent glow flickering like a heartbeat. "They're going to box it in," Lyra whispered, her voice tense. "If those cannons fire, it's over." "Not if we act first," Mika said. She turned to the group. "Are we ready?" The workers nodded, their faces set with grim determination. They had spent nights rigging old factory machinery into weapons and building crude explosives from stolen chemicals. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a distraction. The battle as the first plasma cannon powered up, Mika and her group struck. Explosions erupted along the Thryxian perimeter, throwing guards into disarray. Razarath roared, its bioluminescent glow flaring brightly as it seized the opportunity to strike. The ground shook as it leapt into the fray, its claws tearing through the Thryxian ranks. Mika led a second group toward the cannons. Using Razarath's shard as a power source, they overloaded the weapon's energy cores, causing them to explode in a chain reaction. The shockwave knocked Mika off her feet, but she scrambled back up, her adrenaline fueling her every move. "Keep pushing," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The workers fought with makeshift weapons, their attacks precise and relentless. Years of operating factory machinery had honed their skills, and they turned their tools into instruments of rebellion. Meanwhile, Razarath rampaged through the battlefield, its bioluminescence casting an otherworldly glow over the carnage. A moment of sacrifice. The Thryxian commander, Zaltor, arrived in the midst of the chaos, his armored frame towering over the battlefield. He carried a weapon unlike any Mika had seen before, a sleek, black lance that crackled with dark energy. "You think this beast will save you?" Zaltor sneered, his voice amplified by his armor. "You are insects, crawling toward your own demise." Mika stepped forward, standing between Zaltor and Razarath. Her heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "We're not insects," she said. "We're survivors. And we're done being your slaves." Zaltor lunged, his lance aimed directly at Mika. She braced for the impact, but before the blow could land, Razarath intervened. With a roar that shook the heavens, the creature hurled itself at the commander, its massive form colliding with the Threxian like a meteor. The two titans clashed, their battle tearing through the battlefield. Razareth's claws raked against Zaltor's armor, while the Threxian's lance delivered devastating blows to the creature's already injured body. Mika watched in horror, knowing Razareth couldn't hold out forever. Then, she saw at the energy core of Zaltor's lance, glowing ominously at its base. Grabbing a stolen plasma grenade, she sprinted toward the fight. "Razareth," she screamed, throwing the grenade. The creature understood immediately. With a final, desperate swipe, it struck Zaltor's weapon, driving the grenade into the core. The explosion was blinding. Mika was thrown to the ground, her ears ringing. When the dust settled, Zaltor was gone, and Razareth lay motionless, its body scorched and battered. Triumph and hope. The remaining Threxian forces retreated, their morale shattered by the loss of their commander. The humans erupted in cheers, their voices echoing across the battlefield. For the first time in decades, they had won. Mika rushed to Razareth's side, her heart sinking as she saw the extent of its injuries. The creature's bioluminescence flickered weakly, its massive chest rising and falling with labored breaths. "You did it," she whispered, placing a hand on its scaled body. "You saved us." Razareth let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound Mika chose to interpret as gratitude. Then its eyes closed, and the glow of its bioluminescence faded. A new dawn. Days later, Mika stood before the workers of Sector 14, the shard Razareth had given her, now a symbol of their victory. Around her, humans worked to rebuild, salvaging weapons and resources from the defeated Threxians. "This isn't the end," Mika said, her voice steady. "The Threxians still hold our planet, and millions of others are suffering under their rule. But today, we proved we can fight. We can win." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filled with newfound hope. As Mika stepped down, she glanced toward the horizon. Razareth's body had been taken to a hidden place, where the humans hoped to honor it and, perhaps, learn from its advanced biology. Mika clutched the shard tightly, a spark of light in her hand. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. And so, the enslaved human and the alien beast became the spark of a galaxy-wide rebellion.